Okay, here we are back in the lure lab today. What I'd like to demonstrate to you today is my process for building the eyes that I put on my jigs. Okay, now you see a 1/4 ounce there. That's an 1/8 and a 1/16 ounce. The secret to doing it with this method is that it's very uniform. I've experimented with many methods of making eyes on my jigs, and the problem that I had with it is that they looked good, but they weren't the same from each jig to jig. When I put a kit together, all the eyes were different. Wasn't crazy about that. So I learned this method from, like you are, a YouTube video, and I kind of adapted it to make it my own process. The paints that I use are the CS Vinyl Lure Jig and Finish. They're made for dipping lures in vinyl painting. Never have been crazy about that, but it's excellent paint for doing the eyes. What I do is make these stamps of different sizes. So to do that, you run on down to Harbor Freight. You could buy a kit of 9 hollow punches, okay, that they sell very cheaply. I've tried using paper hole punches and my results were inconsistent on getting them round. The stamps are made using a foam that is an art foam. You can get it at Hobby Lobby or Michael's. I'm going to need a hammer, a hard surface to work on, some toothpicks to use as sticks, okay, for making your stamps. I also use old paint brushes, and you can see I just break off the end of the plastic paintbrush for some of my bigger stamps. Okay, to prepare the sticks, all I usually do is take a pair of side cuts, snip off the stick, and that causes it to pinch a little bit and it's not quite flat. So use a small piece of sandpaper and get a nice flat profile for that foam pad to stick onto. Okay, select the size punch that you're going to use. If you're going to do 2 color eyes like I do, you're going to need 2 different sizes. Okay, for this particular one, let's use this small one right here. Okay, and just stamp out a bunch of those. You'll find that the stamp kind of fills up with them, so then you could just kind of pop them out on your table when you're done. Okay, make yourself a whole bunch of them. Okay, that's the tiniest one, the smallest one. Okay, so then once I have sticks made to glue onto here, the glue that I use, I tried using crazy glue with kind of some mixed results. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. The best stuff that I found is this 2-ton DevCon. It's an epoxy, so you have to make sure you thoroughly mix it and that your ratios of the hardener and the epoxy are equal to get really good results. A little bit of a pain in the neck. It comes in cylinders as well, like a push cylinder, so you can make sure that way that you get equal parts. Mixing it thoroughly is pretty critical though. But then I just mix up a batch of that and then I glue those on. And you have to let them sit, of course. Okay, and I just went to Hobby Lobby and bought a block of that stuff that they put in the in flower pots, that foam, just to stick these in to have them ready when I use them. Okay, so once you have a whole bunch of those made, you're ready for your painting process. Okay, some other things that you're going to want to have is a good supply of napkins. Painting supplies are a little bit messy. Some tubs, old caps off of like cooking oil bottles and metal caps off of like spaghetti jars and stuff like that are excellent to keep around whenever you're doing any mixing of things. The paints tend to be a little bit thick, so the solvent for the CS coating stuff is a little bit expensive, but if you're good at reading the labels, you find out that there's another product out there that is the exact same thing that you can thin your paints with. Okay, so I've got a bright jig head here, so I'm going to use a black background and a white dot in the center of the background for my two-stage eye. I'm using an oversized 3/8 inch jig head to demonstrate with because you can see it a little bit better. The stamp that I use, I'm going to use the biggest one that I make. Okay, and then so I'm going to dot both sides with black. Okay, now this paint is a little bit expensive, but a little bit of it goes a very, very long way if you maintain it. One of the things that I would caution you to do is protect the threads, both on the cap and on the jar, because if you get paint stuck in the middle of them when you cap it up, you'll never get the cap back off. Okay, got an old chip brush here, and I'm going to take some paint and just put it in the middle here. And like I said, a little goes a long way. Avoid getting it on the threads. Okay, so when I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and thin that out a little bit, because what happens now is if you try to stamp with it, you'll notice it gets kind of stringy. When you stamp and you pull, it brings like a string off of it, and then sometimes that flops onto the lure and it just looks unsightly. Okay, immediately cap your paint back up, but before you do that, just do yourself a favor. Clean up the threads of the cap. Make sure you didn't get any paint on the threads of the jar. Get the caps back on these. Don't let them sit uncapped. It dries very quickly. Okay, now I've got some of my solvent already in this jar, and I'm going to use an eyedropper just to kind of add that in. About an equal amount, to be honest with you. And then mix the two up real well. Okay, a lot of times I try to work it down into the corner of the cup that I'm using. And you can test it. If it tends to pull paint, then it's too thick. Add a little bit more thinner. Okay, a little bit goes a long way. Like I said, I could probably do 25 eyes with the amount that I have in there right now. Go ahead and I've got my stamp right here. I'm going to dip that parallel with the eye, touch it, and bring it right back up. Look how perfectly round that is. Flip it to the other side. Touch it and bring it back up. Okay, now I'm going to want to sit that off to the side and let that dry before I do the white. So if I did add 50 jigs, I'd do all 50 of them in black first, have them sitting aside drying, and then by the time I'm done doing the 50th one, I could start over on painting the white dots in the center of the other ones. Okay, as if by magic, I've got a batch of the white paint mixed up quickly here. And I've got my now dry lure eye, my black background. I'm going to use more of a medium-sized stamp for the white. Okay, I've made my puddle here. Like I said, make sure it doesn't pull like a string. Otherwise, you need to thin it out a little bit. And then simply dot your center eye. You usually go I pretty much like to dip in the paint after each one. Make the paint on each one equal. And make them consistent. Okay, so now you got a good jig eye built there. You want to do varying sizes. Make the center eye smaller, and of course use a smaller one. Okay, and as you do this, you'll get a little bit better and a little bit faster and more consistent results. Okay, but that's the process that I use for painting my jig eyes. What you're not seeing over here is I have a little hanging rack that I built years ago. It's basically made out of all thread and 2x6s, just to kind of hang those and let them dry. You'll find that within about an hour or so, it's okay to go ahead and start tying those jigs with your feathers and your tie-ons and everything. But that vinyl paint gets its hardest after about 24 hours. So I don't usually tie them up the same day that I'll go ahead and use them or sell them to somebody else. It will get very hard. It's very tough. Doesn't require any curing like the powder coat did underneath it. I fished all day with them. Never lost an eye off of one of them yet. So I've had some very good results. Give it a try. See what you think. And thanks for joining me again today.